let's look at how we photograph evidence. In order to convict someone, you have to have the evidence. We have to make that jump from probable cause to arrest or probable cause to charge all the way to beyond a reasonable doubt. And we do that with the evidence. So documenting our evidence at the crime scene is a very important step in our collection of evidence and ultimately in the examination of evidence and connecting someone to a crime based on all of that. Let's look at how we do that in a way that we don't get messed up in court and that we get the best result possible. So there are basic principles. The first is the number of photographs that we take of evidence at a crime scene. We take at least 2 photographs of each item of evidence. We take 1 photograph to show where our evidence is located. That could be our mid-range shot. And then the second photograph would be the photograph to show the detail of the evidence. Now that I say that, let's think this through a little bit. Let's say I have 5 cartridge cases all in a small area in my crime scene. If I have 5 cartridge cases, am I telling you you have to take 10 photographs? No. You could just take 6 photographs, one that shows where all 5 of them are located within the scene. That would be that photograph number 1 on our basic principles here. And then a close-up of each of those individually, each one of them referring back, of course, to that first one that showed where they were. So the spirit of the law is what we're looking for here, and maybe not the exact letter of the law. But we need to have those photographs that show where our evidence is located. One of the worst things to have happen, and I've seen this happen before, many times, unfortunately, is you have a crime scene and all of a sudden there's a photograph of a footwear impression, a real nice one, close up, scale, everything that you would want to see in a detailed photograph of a footwear impression. But as you look through all the photographs, you have no idea where in the crime scene or where on earth that picture was taken. Where was that footprint? Is that important? Well, it can be incredibly important. Number one, it establishes that it was there in the correct crime scene. So someone can't claim that with this errant photograph here, and how'd that end up in this series? And isn't that convenient that it just happened to match the defendant's shoe? We don't see it anywhere in the crime scene. Who knows, that could happen. But also the position of it. Where was it in relation to the window that we're alleging the person climbed through? Which direction is it facing at the window? All of those sorts of things can be critical to our case. So this is actually a very important step in photographing evidence, is to have that mid-range to show where in the scene our evidence is located. If we're going to use a scale or a marking device, we need to have 2 photographs of each item of evidence, one without the scale or marker and one with. So if you're going to be putting a numerical marker showing item numbers in your scene, and you're going to take a photograph with the marker showing, which is fine. You need to have at least one photograph where there is no marker. If you're going to use a scale, and that's going to be alongside your evidence to show its size, whatever the purpose of that scale is, well, make sure there is one photograph without the scale. Why do we do this? It's so that we can't later have someone claim that we have covered something important with the scale, and of course they would allege we did that on purpose, or we blocked the view of something with the tent number. Now, getting back to our 5 cartridge cases, if I need to now have a number next to each cartridge case or a scale for some reason, am I now going to have 15 pictures? No. If your mid-range shot shows where all 5 of them are nicely, and also shows there's nothing that you're going to be blocking or covering with your scale or marker, well, then you can just go ahead with your close-up and go ahead and have that scale or marker. But somewhere we have to be able to show a photograph that says, well, here it is without any marking, all right? And it doesn't have to be an individual shot. It could be one that includes some other evidence as well. Next important thing, and that is the position of the camera and scales. When we photograph our evidence, we want to keep our film plane parallel with our evidence. What does that mean? Well, the back of our camera is the film plane. That's where the roll of film used to stretch out. The film plane, that's where the image records. We still call it the film plane, even though we use digital. But in any case, that film plane has to be parallel with our evidence. So if I'm photographing a footwear impression, I have to be shooting straight down with that film plane parallel to my impression. If I'm shooting at any angle other than that, I will introduce distortion into the photograph. As far as keeping your film plane parallel with evidence photography, it is important. It's something we strive to do with all evidence photography, but there are a few things that we photograph where it is, without question, a must do. There's no way around it. Photographing footwear impressions, fingerprints, bloodstain patterns, things that later we're going to take that photograph and do some kind of analysis with. If we're going to take a suspect's shoe and later compare it to the photograph of the impression at the scene, if we have a distorted photograph, it's going to be difficult and not forensically sound to make that comparison. Bloodstain interpretation or analysis. The defense has every right to all of our evidence. That includes the evidence that was at the scene. Well, if there was blood stain on the wall, normally we can't bring the wall into evidence. Normally what we do is we photograph very thoroughly, and if we photograph it properly, then the defense or any other expert that we have on our side can analyze those photographs and make some sound decisions or opinions. They can take measurements off of our photographs and use those measurements to determine angles and so on and so forth. So it is critical for certain evidence that we do this. For all other evidence, it's very important that we do it because we get photographs that are not distorted. So positioning the camera, we keep our film plane parallel. So on this photograph, we see that the film plane, which is right here, is not parallel with our evidence, which is the fingerprint on the handle of this knife. So to fix that, we need to position the camera so that the film plane is parallel with our evidence. Another one of the rules, we fill the frame of our view with the evidence. Example, here's a footwear impression and our L-shaped scale. A decent photograph as far as showing at least the footprint and the scale, but we're wasting all of this space here. I mean, we don't need any of this space around here in our photograph. So we're wasting the opportunity to have more detail, more clarity. We should be in closer, fill the frame with our evidence so that we can record more detail. I'm closer here, but why not use the better angle of the camera, the view of the camera, and fill the frame in this manner? You wouldn't want to be any further away than this. I've given a little bit of space here for the toe, and then I have a little bit of space so that all of the scale shows. And this is a fingerprint on a drinking glass. We're too far away. We need to fill the frame with our evidence. If we are going to use a scale, we need to place that scale on the same plane as our evidence. So going back to the fingerprint on the handle of this knife, what you see here is wrong. The scale is on the easel, yet the evidence is up here on the handle of the knife. Now that's not very much distance, I know, but that will make a difference. And it brings up the opportunity in court to be challenged. Instead, what we have to do is lift up our scale to be on the same plane as our evidence. So how do you do that? Well, this is a little gizmo that has like a little alligator clip on it, and you can use it to position things. In my kit, I have tape spools, thread spools. I have all sorts of things that can be used to prop up something or position things, little clamps, you name it, so that when I need to, I don't have to just search around all the time looking for wads of paper or fashion something at the moment. I've got something in my kit. These are just a set of 3 scales in stair-step fashion. And if you look straight down at the lines, you can see that the scale closest to you appears larger than the scale further away. But the thing is, the scales are both the same size. It's because of the distance. If you have any one of these scales on the right plane, it's fine. But if it's not on the right plane, the measurements will be wrong. Now, why do we need a scale in our photographs? Well, just so we're clear, the reason we need a scale is to later make a life-size photographic print. And what has to be life-size is the critical part of the evidence. So if my fingerprint is my most critical part of my evidence, that scale has to be on the plane of the fingerprint on the evidence. Now let's talk about exposure when photographing evidence. One of the ways I love to photograph evidence is to use steady burning lamps. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy. This is just a reflector light bulb kind of thing that you can get at a hardware store. And of course, they make ones for photography as well, but you know, they're almost identical. So, and then they cost a lot more. But this is just a reflector bulb kind of thing with a, you can clamp it onto something when you're working. And it is powered by plugging into the wall. Well, the nice thing about one of these is I can plug it in and have everything all set up, my evidence and my camera on a tripod or a stand or something. And then I can look in my viewfinder and move the light source around. And when I'm doing that, I can be watching to see what shadows I'm going to get, what highlights I'm going to get, essentially what kind of result I'm going to get before I even snap the picture. And then when I find the best place for that light to be, I just anchor it or hold it and snap the picture. And now I have a really good result. The frustrating way to do it is to, have a flash or something and go, well, I think this might work. I click, you look at the review and you go, oh no, I got a big glare in the wrong place. Well, let me try that again. Click. Well, that's better, but there's still a glare over here now. Let me move it around this way. Click. And all of a sudden you've taken a dozen photographs when all you really had to do was preview it and then take your picture. Well, if you're just going, and by the way, you can do that with electronic flash. You can preview with a steady burning lamp and then use your flash for the main light source. But the previewing is the important part. But let's say all you're going to do is use the steady burning lamps, which again, I think is a wise thing to do for a lot of evidence. Well, we need to consider exposure. When you are using your camera without flash, maybe you're going to be in shutter speed priority mode. You'll set it at 60th of a second. And now you have that light going and you say, oh, this is good right here. Well, if you're in shutter speed priority, the camera is selecting the right f-stop for you. All you have to do is snap the picture. Should be fine. If it's too bright or too dark, use the plus minus to take another picture and get a better result. But to get the best starting point, you should be considering what the camera is seeing, especially the background in these situations. So let's say, for an example, I have a black powder dusted fingerprint on a white countertop. Well, if I dust this fingerprint with black powder, I'm not going to actually have a black fingerprint. It'll be dark gray. And it'll be dark gray on kind of a light gray background now, because some of that powder is going to be on the countertop as well. Well, most of that is very light. The fingerprint is just going to be a few ridges. The background is going to be almost all white. So when your camera is doing this in one of your manual mode, or excuse me, one of your automatic modes, what is the camera looking for? It's looking for 18% reflectance. So it's looking for what you would get with a gray card. So what it's looking for is this. So if I'm going to photograph a black powdered print on a white background, what I need to do is actually lay this down next to the print and show the camera, if I'm just using a steady burning lamp, this is 18% reflectance. Hit the AEL button, automatic exposure lock button on my camera. And now I can go ahead and take a photograph without the gray card there of the fingerprint, and I will get a nice result. Otherwise, the photograph will undoubtedly be underexposed. It'll be too dark because it's taking this nice bright background that we want to keep and making it neutral or gray. For our exposure, if we are using a steady burning lamp, we need to use a gray card to help us with our exposures. Because if you have a grossly underexposed photograph of a fingerprint, yeah, you can put it in Photoshop and make adjustments, but you're starting out with in a bad spot. What you really want to do is start out with a good exposure, then tweak it, not start out with a lousy exposure and force to correct it. All right. Another thing to consider is bracketing. Many types of evidence, if you do a little bracketing, sometimes some detail comes out when you're a little underexposed or a little overexposed. Fingerprints are also an area where that can happen. And then the next thing I want to talk about is the digital image type. When you start with a raw file as your image that you captured, now you have all sorts of controls for image processing, post-processing. And we need to have that ability with our evidence photographs. So what you'll find is a lot of departments will say it's okay to shoot JPEG fine for overall crime scene use. But when you're taking photographs of evidence, and maybe they'll even qualify it and say evidence that will be analyzed, I don't know. But when you're photographing evidence, use RAW. And that way you have the ability later to do with that image what you need to do. Let's look at some lighting setups, how you would position your lights to photograph different objects. So we're talking about evidence. So here we have what you're looking at, should be able to determine is at the top here, this is a camera. All right. And the line coming straight down, that's the view of the camera. These little things on the sides are indications of lights. All right. And so this would be the light traveling from this light or lamp. And then also the line here can indicate the path of the reflected light back to the camera. And as we know, all that our camera sees is reflected light. All right. So a basic lighting configuration would be to have a lamp at a 45-degree angle to whatever you're photographing. What this does is give lighting with less reflection or with minimal reflection. Now, a lot of the reflection depends on what the object is, but if you have your light coming straight down from the camera, you're likely to get more reflection than we like. Okay. Now, when you have light coming at an angle, you're going to get shadows. If the shadows are going to be an issue, now sometimes we want shadows. I'm going to talk more about that on the next slide. But sometimes we don't want a lot of shadows, or we want to reduce shadows. What we can do is put a second lamp coming from another direction at 45 degrees, and that will help to fill in the shadows on the side that the first lamp is creating. Now, will it eliminate them completely? No, but it can reduce the shadows by about 50%. You'll end up shadows on both sides, depending on what it is you're photographing, the configuration, but it will reduce the harsh shadow that you would get with just one light. All right, so that's just basic lighting. I may refer to lighting setups as we talk about photographing evidence, so this gives you an idea. By the way, these different setups or configurations, they're not just done in the laboratory with the camera on a copy stand. You can do this in the field just by pointing your camera and holding your electronic flash in the other hand. It's positioning your equipment relative to your evidence that is the configuration. All right. It's just a lot easier in a lab when you have a copy stand and you can set everything, anchor everything, and find focus, and it's much nicer, much more controlled. But we do the same thing with our camera equipment in our hands. This is oblique lighting. So the lighting is at a low angle. Notice that instead of up here at 45 degrees, it's down much lower. And this is a good technique when you want to create shadows. Now, some of our evidence is going to be three-dimensional, and to see the detail, you're actually going to have to see shadows that you create. We're photographing things like three-dimensional evidence like tool marks, impressions. For footwear impressions, we often will use low oblique lighting, depending on how deep the impression is. And what it's going to do is cause some small shadows so that we can see what the detail actually is. This would be an idea of bounce lighting. With bounce lighting, the idea is the light bounces off of a surface before it reaches your subject. And then it will bounce or reflect off of that, your subject, to then reach the lens. Now, why would we use bounce lighting? It will give us less glare on things, and it does reduce contrast. Now, for the life of me, I cannot think of any evidence that I photograph where I want less contrast. So even though this is an option, it's something that I don't see used often, and I do not use. If you want to reduce glare, probably a better way is to use tinting. And we'll talk about tinting as well. And then this is transmitted lighting. Transmitted lighting is where the light is coming through your object toward your lens. This is actually a good technique when you have a transparent or semi-transparent object and the light can pass through, and it creates more detail for your evidence, such as a fingerprint. So if you have a fingerprint on a drinking glass, if the light is coming through the glass towards the camera, you can get some really nice results. This is front directional or axis lighting. Now, we need to understand what we're looking at here. Of course, this is the light source on the left, the camera above, our evidence below. What we have in the way of the light here is a piece of glass set at a 45-degree angle. So now the light is shining through the glass and passing past our evidence overhead. But some of that light reflects off of this angle of glass and reflects back straight down into our object. So this is often used with cylinders, a mug, looking into something that when you need lighting to go into it, you have difficulty because you can't get the light in there. So we actually allow some of the light to reflect off of this sheet of glass down there, and then it will reflect back up to the camera lens. Now, there's one thing that's missing from this picture. Normally what you want to do is put a black cloth or something here to catch the light to the right of this image here, because light that comes back, if it now hits something like a white wall, it can reflect back. It'll hit this side and reflect up, and it will reduce some of your clarity through the glass. I have a couple of pictures to illustrate this one. Here is a setup that's not in really a lab. You could do this anywhere. And what we have is our camera on the tripod. This is some kind of a cylinder, and we want to get lighting inside the cylinder to photograph directly in there. Now, if you just popped up your flash and it fired, it would be coming at, the light would be coming at a different angle than the actual view. And so you would end up with the light hitting in here and causing part of it to be a shadow, because there wouldn't be, the light would not cover everything. So it really would not be quite effective. We have this piece of glass, we have a light source so the light can go through. Some of that light will reflect down into the cylinder, and then you have the view in there and you can see what it is. The exposure is done. All right, so this is another little example. It shows the glass reflects. Here's a setup here. And you can use it to photograph things other than into an object. This is a fingerprint on a CD. Now, when you photograph something like this, you can do this with just oblique lighting. That's what I would do. It'd be a lot simpler. But this was done with the axis lighting, and you can see it. You can get a nice result there too. This is with it then converted to black and white. Great job. Beautiful picture. So this is a photograph of an almond in the bottom of a coffee mug. So this would be very difficult to photograph otherwise, because when you pop your flash up, there it is, and here's your lens, and they're not looking at the same thing. This way we have nice even lighting. And then this is a photograph with some pills or supplements in a bottle. Again, trying to shoot inside a bottle like that, very difficult. Now let's move on to a little more about these important general aspects of photographing evidence. Previewing lighting. So I touched on this when I was talking about using the steady burning lamp, but also when you are photographing evidence, it's a great idea to have a flashlight, and then just go ahead and use your flashlight to see what kind of result you're going to get if you put your light in a certain place. So if I want to use electronic flash, and here's where having a tripod is really quite handy. If you anchor the camera on a tripod, now you free up your hands. If you have to be holding your camera and now you're using a flashlight and then you have to position a flash, it gets a little difficult and you're never going to be spot on. You're always going to be chasing a moving target, not to mention the focus issue and all of that. So anchoring your camera on a tripod, by far the best thing you can do when photographing most evidence. All right. So you have your hands free, you're looking in your viewfinder, you turn on your flashlight and you find where you want your light to be best. And then you go ahead and put your electronic flash in its place and snap the picture. On this flash here, on the back, it actually has this little, it looks like a head and shoulders of a person with a shadow behind it. And the nice thing is they position the button where your finger is when you're holding the flash in your hand. So if I need to preview lighting for evidence and I'm using this flash, by pressing this little button here, so it gives me, I held it down longer than the light was on. It has a timeout, but it does give you that little bit of light for a while. And so looking in my viewfinder, finding a place for my light, I can use a flashlight or I can use this and let it give me some light to see. Now, as far as using a flashlight, when I do it, I just hold the flashlight on top of my flash like this. And now, and I have the flashlight on. And as I'm looking in the viewfinder, I find the right place for the light to be. And then before I snap the picture, I just lift the flash up slightly. Now that flashlight beam will overshoot whatever I'm trying to shoot, and it positions the flash where the flashlight head had been. And it's real simple. You just do that a few times and you'll be amazed at how much better your evidence photographs come out, because you took the time to preview the lighting. How do we get close images? Now, perhaps you've already used your camera a bit and you've found out how close you can focus to something. Most of our 18 to 55 zoom lenses do not allow us to get in super close. You would think, well, what if I go telephoto? That works like a telescope. Well, you're still not getting a photograph of the bee on a flower. You know, that's not going to happen. Instead, we need to have a lens that is designed for close focusing, or some sort of accessory for our lens that isn't designed for close focusing. On mine, the closest I can get is about 1 foot away. So being 1 foot away from my subject with this lens is not going to allow me to photograph detail like a fingerprint. I have to be in much closer than that. So how do we go about doing that? Well, let's look at a couple of options. One would be to have a lens that's designed for that. So on the right-hand side of this picture, we have a macro lens. This is a lens that is designed for close focusing. This is a macro lens I'm holding in my hand. It's just designed so that you can do close-up photography. And the way it sits, I can get to 1:1, which means life size. So if I want to photograph a fingerprint, I can make it fill the frame of my digital camera. On the top left, we have something called a bellows. The bellows works with the idea that the further you put your lens away from the film plane, the more magnification you will get. So if you can just move your lens away from the camera and take that picture, you'll get more magnification. You put the camera body on the back here, the lens on the front, it just couples on there. And then this is kind of an accordion material that goes in and out as you adjust with these knobs. So you can dial the lens out further from the camera or in closer to the film plane in order to get the magnification you need with a standard lens. So you could just put just about any kind of lens on there, and then this will work for that. Now, those are expensive. They can also tear. So another thing you could have instead is extension tubes. So what I have here, I'm holding up at the camera, are extension tubes. And they can give you some, they come in sections. You can take them apart and have more or less extension to get the kind of magnification you need. And those are relatively inexpensive. And then here, what we have are close-up filters. And what they are is just magnifying glasses of different strengths that screw in front of your lens. So on the front of your lens, you have threading, and you can screw this filter on to give you increased magnification. They come usually 3 in a set, so that you can choose the amount of magnification you want. So it comes with a +1, +2, +4, and +10. Now, there are some drawbacks to using those. The edge sharpness is not good. So when you look at your finished picture, you'll see the edges are kind of fuzzy. But if you're photographing a fingerprint, that's usually going to be right in the center, and you should be just fine. One way to cope with the edge sharpness issue with those close-up filters is to use smallest lens openings you can. It's like f16, f11. Those will give you better edge sharpness than if you use f3.5. And then the last one here is a reversing ring. A reversing ring is where you turn your lens around to look through the wrong direction. Now, you've probably all looked through a telescope or binoculars before. If you turn your binoculars around and look through the wrong direction, everything looks further away, doesn't it? Well, just imagine that when you have your lens on your camera, it's in the everything's further away mode. If you could just turn your lens around and put it on backwards, now you would have magnification.